This is Ed Stetzer Live, and this and every Saturday at this time, we come to you with conversations about church and culture and mission, the moment we're in, and how we might navigate it well. As you might be able to tell in just a minute, I'm actually out of the country. Like, I'm far away out of the country. Last week we actually broadcast live from Indonesia, but here I have some guests, and we're actually recording in a studio of a television station here in Indonesia. And my two guests are pastors in Indonesia as well. I'm going to talk to them, but I need to tell you up front, this is a pre-recorded program, so we can't take your calls. So let me introduce our guests. First, Reverend Michael Christian is the lead pastor of Gibeon Church in Surabaya and the director of City to City Indonesia. Remember that because both of our guests are related to City to City Indonesia. It's a church planting movement founded under Redeemer City to City. And, of course, founded by Tim Keller. He spent 21 years in the U.S. serving churches in Seattle and Los Angeles, holds degrees from Purdue, City University, and the Talbot School of Theology, which was important to work that in with a master's in Christian apologetic. He's returned to Indonesia in 2014, and he and his wife have led Gibeon Church with a strong gospel-centered vision and a passion for integrating the gospel into every area of church life. He's also authored several books, and they have 3 children as well. My other guest is Pastor Tezar Putra. He's the teaching pastor of Covenant City Church. I had the privilege of preaching for him on Sunday. He planted this church in 2016. Tezar and his wife both have attended the Reformed Theological Seminary for their graduate education, served on college ministry with campus outreach, and of course you have an MDiv degree, Tezar, from Reformed Theological Seminary, and you're ordained in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, which our listeners are almost all in America, so some of them may be in EPC churches, and now you're a pastor within the Redeemer City to City Church Planting Network. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Nice to be here. All right, let's jump into our conversation. We're in Indonesia, which, again, honestly, many Americans are less familiar with Indonesia. It's the largest Muslim country in the world by population. It's a huge country. Was it 17,000 islands all throughout the country? Yeah. We're in Jakarta, which is 20 million people in the metro area. About that. Just casually larger than, it's pretty huge. So tell us a little bit about, first, let's start here just talking about Indonesia in general. You're a Christian pastor doing ministry. You're in Surabaya. Yeah. What's it like being a pastor? You've lived plenty in America. What are the differences?
Yeah, the differences, there's a lot of diversity here in Indonesia. There's 5 different religions, mm-hmm. and of course, we all have some kind of freedom in all of them, but of course with limit. We can evangelize, but at the same time, you got to be really careful in how you do evangelizing. And so there's a lot of pluralism, and that's what's happening in the culture. So we have to be really sensitive in speaking about other religion, mm-hmm. and we can worship freely, mm-hmm. but at the same time, we cannot be as freely. There's illusion of freedom, but at the same time, you can still do things underground.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Tezar, let's talk a little bit about that. This is for many Americans. Remember, most Americans aren't familiar with that this is the largest Muslim country in the world. And depending upon the Muslim country you're in, religious freedom can be drastically curtailed. Mm-hmm. We think of the Saudi Kingdom or things of that sort. Mm. So here, I preached at your church on Sunday, and it's in public. It's in a building, right? People could know where it is. But at the same time, evangelism, and particularly in and around people of other faiths who convert, that can become real challenging. Yeah. So how do you work life and minister in a context like this?
Yeah, and what's interesting about the urban city setting in Indonesia is there is a bit more freedom, mm-hmm. because it's quite westernized, and people are more open to those thoughts and ideas. I think the general principle is if there's no coercion involved, mm-hmm. or if there's no sort of forcing or manipulating involved, and that's clear throughout the process, people generally let things happen as it happens. But so we do have to be very sensitive to display no sort of manipulation or coercion, or when it comes to sharing your faith in the gospel, and let it be from that own person's sort of initiative and freedom of will to come, to
and so
that's
gospel. even if people like us. I've been here. I know that there's a significant Hindu population, predominantly in Bali, I think,
right.
and Buddhist.
Yeah.
But Islam is the prevailing faith, 90% Muslim in this country, and hundreds of millions, right? So then, what might it look? Because one of the things I hope our audience at Stetzer Live listens to is they want to pray for you. So, what would we pray for Christians in a predominantly overt Muslim setting? I mean, every night I hear the call to prayer. We don't hear that anywhere
That's
in America.
Right, yeah.
So, how would we pray for you?
I think so. When I first came here, I was on mission mode. Let's go share the gospel. Let's go out there and do all this. And now that I've pastored for 9 years, it's become more of a let's get the churches in Indonesia all generally on the same gospel page. Let's start there. And I think what will happen is, as that occurs, an organic sort of communication and outreach of the gospel will happen. So I think right now, honestly, the prayer would be that if you guys could pray for the churches in Indonesia to all be united in a deep gospel understanding and doctrine and theology. I think what will happen is the rest of Indonesia, hopefully, would be able to see what it is that we believe. And be drawn to it because if you go out there in a sort of diehard sort of way, it's just not gonna. There's going to be a lot of pushback.
Yeah, particularly when you're even when you're in a majority secular place. When you're a minority religion, America. I mean, most people aren't practicing Christians, but Christianity sort of pervades the culture, remnants of it at least. So it makes a bit of a difference. Michael, so talk to me a little bit about how you're in Surabaya. So there are many big cities, but the biggest is Jakarta,
and Surabaya.
And Surabaya is the second largest,
biggest,
right?
Yes.
And so, we gathered together Christian leaders. I was really impressed with the array of Christian leaders that came together.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to talk about city to city in just a minute.
Sure.
But I'm still trying to help people understand a little bit about, like, in everyday life.
Yeah.
So you're at a restaurant. Can you pray? You're over a friend's house. Who's a Muslim person. What do you do and what don't you do, and how do you navigate those things? Because again, that's a foreign world for us.
Yeah, definitely. You can do things the same way as the United States through friendship, building relationship. But at the same time, you don't want to have a debate or try to be too hostile or talking about the comparison between a religion too obvious.
Right.
So there is no apparent persecution, but there is a tension.
Right.
And
kind
this
of a
is
low-level sense,
Yeah, but it is also good because at the same time, it gives us, continue to pray, vigilant about mission and intentional about mission. So that's why we always build relationship. For example, like about baptism, every quarter we baptize people and we have to ask people from different religion if they want to convert. They have to sign a statement over like a release statement that said, I'm not being coerced.
Really? There's actually a government has you sign a statement.
Not a government.
But you do it just for safety's sake and certainty. That makes
so
sense. Okay.
Every baptism, I have to sign at least 15 of them as a senior pastor, and the other part is their consent, basically. Okay. So I'm not being cursed, that kind of stuff. So yes, that's the tension and also the dynamic.
Yeah, and so it seems to me too that just my experience, and I'm keeping in mind I preached at your church and at Tezar's church, Pastor Tezar's church, and we did an event together. So when I noticed that the Christians are the Christians more Chinese? Is the percentage of Christianity higher among the Chinese, or is it also something we're going to see in ethnic Indonesians as well?
It's in pockets.
In pockets, okay.
Yes,
where I have
pockets.
been maybe has been the case, because I've been in the bigger cities and things of that sort.
Even in Bali, there is a denomination that's actually ethnic church in Bali.
Yeah, okay.
Gereja
Balinese.
Bali. Yes, Balinese.
Okay.
And it's also in East Indonesia. More of them, most of them are Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Those are from the Portuguese invasion.
Right, the Dutch.
Yeah, the Dutch and us as well.
Yeah. Okay, so that does shape some of that cultural context as well. But Michael, unpack that more for us, because we kind of think, let's just do practical ministry. Do we really need to think theologically? Just teach the Bible and love people. Why a theological vision for ministry and mission?
Yeah, because sometimes there's a lot of gap between what you know doctrinally and the ministry practices. Usually when you come into a context or in a new town, you have your preference, you have your ministry experiences. So what you tend to do is to just apply what you know from back where you were, and then you just copy and paste without looking at the context, without looking at the culture. What theological vision do for you is actually to look at, with the gospel lens, what is actually the culture idol, what the culture is longing for. Then you shape your ministry, try to answer that, affirm that first, and then see the contradiction that the culture is trying to answer their longing with worldly views, whatever solution.
Yeah, something that they're trying to plug in instead of the truth of the gospel.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you apply theological vision, you suddenly can see, how can I answer those the deepest longing of this culture through the gospel clearly. So instead of copy and paste what you've done in the past, you have tailored a new answer with gospel clarity to apply it in your context. And this way, this is a different way of thinking than any of the conference that I've been.
Right.
Because usually the conference that I've been will give me some methods.
Right.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. This is the steps in order for you to reach a nation, in order for you to reach a culture. But instead of methods, they give you a lens. And that's what theological vision is. Changing your lens and looking at what the culture is longing for.
Okay, we're having a fascinating conversation, and we're going to continue our conversation in just a moment. But I wanted to sort of frame a little bit of where we are, because it's a very different world. And it's a different world when people hear majority Muslim. They sometimes think the Saudi kingdom, which is a very different experience that's here. There's religious freedom, but there's also a downward pressure in and on Christianity. Yes. We see and we feel. And I think that's going to frame and shape a lot of our conversation moving forward. So let me remind you, you're listening to Ed Stetzer Live. And unfortunately, it's called Ed Stetzer Live, and we're not live right now, so we can't take your calls. But we do want to continue our conversation in just a moment. And I think you'll find our conversation today fascinating, helpful, give you an opportunity to pray, but also to listen and learn what's going on in other parts of the world. A reminder to you, you can follow Ed Stetzer Live on social media, all the different apps, just at Ed Stetzer Live, and you can follow along with us there. We're going to continue our conversation with Pastor Tazar and Pastor Michael, and we're going to jump into what City to City is. It started in Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City, what gospel difference it's making in the world. So let me encourage you, stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation here on Ed Stetzer Live, Moody Radio and affiliates, in just a moment. Okay, we're back. It's Stetzer Live. We're actually here at the headquarters of MNC, which is, I just toured this. The broadcast impact is just fascinating and widespread. And so thank you them for allowing us to use their studios. Thank you for Pastor Michael, Pastor Tazar, for coming in, having this conversation today. We'll remind you that if you're listening, we're not live today. This is pre-recorded so that we could have this conversation at a reasonable time. If we did it live, gentlemen, it would be midnight. I did it last week at midnight here in Indonesia time. Okay, so I want to talk some about the ministries that you do. All right, so I want you to tell me a little bit. We'll start with you, Pastor, and tell me a little bit about what City to City is and what it's doing in Indonesia.
Yeah, City to City is not a denomination, but it's a church planting training and also church revitalization training. We help churches. We help church planters, and we come alongside of them. So we basically train, resource, and journey for church planters, especially in cities.
Yeah.
So that's why we are not a body that will authorize church plants, but we help
By that you mean you're not like a denomination, like
That's
someone
right.
might be a Presbyterian. Pastor Chase is a Presbyterian, so he would get approval of his denomination to go plant.
That's right.
But you
We
resource and partner with them as well.
That's right.
Okay.
We will come alongside with denomination. We partner with denomination. We train the planters. Also, we train church leaders to help them revitalize the established church as well. So there are two tracks. One of them for church planter, the other one is for church revitalization. And we're not just doing training, but we come alongside with them, doing coaching, post-intensive modules for at least 2 years.
Yeah.
So at least when they plant the church can survive, not just survive, but thrive and root it and grow.
Yeah, you have a very high survivability rate as well. I was in our conference earlier, I was sort of teasing you about that. It's a very high survivability rate.
That's right.
But, typically in the U.S., after 3 years, it's a 2/3 survivability rate.
Wow.
So 2 out of 3. So 1 out of 3 don't make it. But of the 2/3 that do make it, about half of them are self-sufficient. Half of them still need mission support after, that's after 4 years. Okay, but why church planting? Like, again, maybe even people think in America, and you've been there in the U.S. as well, but why make church planting a priority? Why not just help establish churches?
Exactly, because when you church plant, there's so many different subcultures in a society. There is no one or two church that can, reach all those subcultures. You need all kinds of different churches, and sometimes whoever that you can reach, I can't reach,
right.
But whoever that I can reach, you cannot reach. So I guess we need to have. This is the great commandment. We need to go, therefore, make disciples, and that's why making disciples is planting churches, because that's the. I would like to borrow your thing earlier. That is not a new trend, but it's actually New Testament strategy.
New Testament strategy. That's right. That's right. Good. Okay, good. So, and a perfect example maybe is, so your church, what's the name of your church?
Gibeon Church.
Gibeon Church. That's
in
right.
Surabaya.
Gibeon Church. And it's in Surabaya, and it's in what language?
In Bahasa.
Bahasa, which is Bahasa.
Bahasa Indonesia.
Bahasa in Indonesian.
Yeah.
But Pastor Tazar, your church is not in Bahasa Indonesia.
That's right.
So you've planted this church. Tell us about who are you reaching in the church plant that you're involved with?
Yeah, so we started off Covenant City Church. We decided to do it in English. A few reasons.
Which may surprise many Americans because you're here, but it makes sense as you explain it.
I mean, there's a few reasons, and not in this particular order, but I think one, my own limitations at the time. I came back, I knew Indonesian, but it wasn't quite good enough to be able to preach. So that was a consideration, if I'm honest. Another one is that Jakarta is very westernized, so a lot of people here understand English. Almost everyone understands English. They may not be able to speak it or converse in it, but they understand it enough to be able to get what we're saying. I think the third one is that in Indonesia, people are very open to Western things and thoughts and ideas. So it's not this foreign sort of concept. You know, people watch English movies and music. So yeah, I think those are some of the considerations.
Makes sense. So you planted this church, and again, it's a little strange for people. You meet in a building. Is it the building next door to where we are right now?
It's in the same building.
In the same building.
Different.
Okay. So you meet in this very building. What floor do you meet on?
14th.
You go to the floor. We just don't do that. And it's a beautiful, it looks like a performing arts center. So I'm assuming there's shows in there during the week. But you have it on Sundays, and that is how long have you been in what we would call temporary space?
We've been there for 1.5 years now.
Okay.
Almost 2. Yeah, it was supposed to be a temporary space. It was supposed to be during the COVID era when you had the social distance.
Right.
We wouldn't have fit in our old space.
Right.
And then we were supposed to move out after that limitation was taken off, but we grew and decided to stay there.
Yeah, I think it surprised people, though, services in English, which when you've been around the world, you actually find that often socially upwardly mobile people often want to, it's not just you had a few Westerners there. I think I walked up to one guy and I said I thought he was a gringo. What's
bule? Call him bule here.
Bule here. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is the equivalent of a gringo. But it is an opportunity to reach people for the gospel, and your church has been growing and reaching people in the process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why then get involved? City City is very much known for church planting. You've planted a church. Why not just say, I got a lot of work to do? I went to your church. It's a thriving church. How old are the people? It was like a young church.
Average of mid-20s.
Mid-20s
yeah,
is the average
early 30s.
I felt very old. You're very kind to me. They let me to preach. So, but why not just be happy, satisfied with one church and grow that? Why church planting?
I think it's a New Testament command to keep planting churches. I think the sheer number of people in Jakarta is just huge, and I calculated a long time ago. I don't remember what the number is now, but I think if every church in Jakarta, if there's no more church plants, with the amount of churches we have in Jakarta, each church would have to reach like 5,000 people to reach all of Jakarta. And it's just that's unrealistic, you know, and added on top of that, the many subcultures that Pastor Mike shared earlier, I can't reach all the subcultures. Even I speak in Indonesian, there's different dialects and different...
That's right.
And you actually said during your service, you put up a slide and you said our sister church, which is in Bahasan, Indonesia.
Yes.
Am I saying that right? Bahasan?
Yeah, Bahasan, Indonesia.
Bahasan, Indonesia. So those are values you already have, planting, engaging in others, and that's a part of what the DNA of your church is.
Yeah, so your good friend Steve Childers.
Yes, we love Steve. Steve Childers, Pathway Learning. He's a friend of ours. Yeah,
he would always just remind all of us during the church planting class in RTS that, hey, you want to try as best you can to plant pregnant churches.
Yes.
And what he means by that is you want to plant a church that already has a vision to church plant, because you add that into an already busy church schedule, it's going to be hard to sort of throw that in midway once everything's set up. But if you go ahead and just rip the Band-Aid off and have that culture from the beginning, it may seem hard at the beginning, but then it just becomes a part of your thinking and your processing routine. So, and so we all have always wanted to be a resource church. That's a big dream to have, you know, and I don't think that should have been a goal. I think the goal should have just been have a healthy church. That alone is already hard enough to do, you know what I mean? But we kind of shot for it, and we were able to plant another church. And every other church we plant, we've committed to plant Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesia churches. So we're not going to plant more English-speaking churches because the need is Indonesian.
Right. Much more widespread need for sure.
Right.
So you're minding your own business here. You mentioned you were at RTS. I used to teach that church planting course with Steve. But you were there. You come back to Indonesia. Like, why does Tim Keller fit into all this? Like, how is Tim Keller, like, I come to Indonesia and I see Tim Keller on the slides. I mean, he's just a guy from New York. He wasn't even a real New Yorker. I'm a real New Yorker. I grew up in New York. He was a Virginian. So, but I mean, city to city, how does it become such a leader globally in this space?
I think Tim adds a lot of value to Christianity and understanding of mission as a whole. But I think the one thing that he really is helpful in, and we heard this in a recent conference as well, is this idea of a theological vision. A theological vision is a complex word and term, and it's pretty much the idea that between your doctrine and your application, there's this sort of middleware that transitions one to another. And you just have to be aware of that so that you can contextualize well to wherever it is you're trying to contextualize at. So I think that sort of idea that you get in, I think, the first or second chapter of Center Church.
Center Church is like his key work on some of these topics.
I think that really hits a lot of pastors and missionaries.
That's right.
To where it makes sense to them, and it's a big aha moment when you get that. So I think, really, city to city is just trying to help apply that in preaching and discipleship and in leadership and worship. You know, so I think that's what he offered that really has hit home.
It certainly has rallied people around the world through city to city, for which I've been impacted. I think we're all been very thankful. For more information on that, you can go to City City's website, or City City Indonesia has its own website as well. I saw it in English and Bahasan Indonesian. We're going to continue our conversation in just a moment with Pastor Michael, Pastor Tazar, here live from Indonesia. I want to talk more when we come back about a theological vision for ministry. Just to remind our listeners that, first of all, we're thankful for our listeners here at Ed Stetzer Live. We are not live, however, today. We are pre-recording so that we can have reasonable hours to talk to these amazing pastors, and we're going to continue our conversation with them, and we're going to weigh in and kind of talk about a theological ministry, a vision for ministry and mission that has shaped city to city, and I think rightfully can shape the Church of Jesus Christ in America as it is impacting churches here in Indonesia as well. So let me thank our team in Chicago. We have an amazing team. Merle is our engineer. Karen is our producer. We normally have a team working the phones as well. Let me also thank thank all of our partners and affiliates. We have Moody Radio, which of course owns and operates several stations, but we also have partners and affiliates all across the country, from K-Wave to LA to Faith Radio in the north central states. And there's 250 outlets, so I shouldn't probably list them all. And let me thank you for your prayers and support for Ed Stetzer Live as well. Because of your partnership, we're able to broadcast this program that actually helps shape and maybe bring some deeper conversations to theology, mission, and ministry in the world in which we live today. And sometimes we're far away, as the case in Indonesia. To the degree we can, we, of course, often want to broadcast live as well. But then sometimes when we can't, we get to have guests in a more reasonable time during the day, as we're having today. So thanks so much for listening this and every Saturday on Moody Radio. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer live from Indonesia with Pastor Tezar, Pastor Michael, and you represent the big cities of Indonesia, right? You got Surabaya. How many people in Surabaya?
About 6 million.
About 6 million, which is just so. It's Chicago basically. So it's
really
yeah,
Chicago is 6 million.
Okay. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Well, it depends on how far you go out in the metro area, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we're live from Indonesia. Remember, we're not taking your calls because I said we're live, but we're actually pre-recording. Ed Stetzer Live is pre-recording in Indonesia. Okay, so let's talk some about that theological vision for ministry and mission, because part of the reality is that it's very easy to fall in love with somebody else's methods and to fall in love with somebody else's mission field.
That's right.
So somebody goes off to a conference, and I've seen this multiple times. I've seen this, and people go off to Saddleback, and they want to see what Saddleback, and then try to do Saddleback there. And then, they go off to, I don't know, the Gen X churches, and then they'd go off eventually to Redeemer. And so, and I think it's kind of interesting because Keller's such an influence in City influence globally, is that when I took my kids to Redeemer, they were not impressed. Because they kind of grew up in a contemporary kind of, I don't know, casual, non-denominational feel. And Redeemer was just transparently was a lot like your church, Pastor Tezar, and they're not used to that.
Thank you.
Well, no, it's beautiful. I think right now, two of my daughters would love that. They're like, they grew up in the contemporary church, and they're kind of done with the contemporary church. They want more tradition and liturgy. It's in some ways generational. But we went to Redeemer Presbyterian, and there was a band, was basically 4 guys on horns doing kind of like a performance, and there was a typical liturgy in a Presbyterian church. But what sometimes happens is that someone goes to that and says, well, that's what I got to do. I got to do that in my context. And so they fall in love with somebody else's ministry and somebody else's mission field. But I'm convinced that the how of ministry is in many ways determined by the who, when, and where of culture. Not in all ways, right? That's part of the theological vision for ministry. So let's go to Pastor Tezar. And so how do you have a theological vision for ministry, but then live it out in a different ministry context?
Yeah, I think there's no shortcut to you got to know your Bible.
Yep.
Because if you don't know what the principles are in the Bible, you're never going to know how to contextualize it, because then you're not going to know the difference between essence and form, and then you'll just do the form that you're used to or the form that you knew beforehand without knowing the essence. But when you know the essence, you can confidently and with good conscience go to a different culture and say, you know what, the point of them doing this in my old church was because they wanted to emphasize this. But if I do that same thing here, it's actually going to have a different emphasis. So an easy example would be, I'm Presbyterian.
Yeah.
So I come from a tradition of churches, although I didn't come to Christ I came to Christ later in life, so it's not like this was embedded in me.
Right, sure.
But I still appreciated the idea of a robe.
Yeah.
And the reason is because I love the idea of what robes represent.
Yeah.
Robes represent, look, come to church, you don't need to see what I'm wearing. Right. You don't need to see how the color fits with the backdrop. You just need to hear my mouth speaking and my hands moving. That's all we need to focus on.
Because it's not about you.
It's not about me. It's not about the pastor. Yeah. But if I wear a robe in Jakarta,
is that a whole different vibe?
It would have the opposite effect.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would not be helping people focus on God's word. It'll be very distracting.
Okay, interesting.
So I just wear the same shirt every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
Right? Okay. But now at the same time, your church, your EPC, for those who are in the United States, the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, and I've had the privilege of, I think I've done their annual meeting twice, their General Assembly twice. Yeah. Your church is more traditional and liturgical than the vast majority of EPC churches. So how is that a contextual decision that you made in Jakarta? Because I'm guessing your church is Pentecostal. I'm guessing it's not as liturgical and formal as his.
No, it's not.
Okay, so tell because that had to be. I mean, here you are. You're trained at RTS. You're thinking about contextualization. How does that become a contextualization conversation?
So I think if you asked me 9 years ago when we planted, and you ask me now, I think there are things now that we do in our liturgy that back then I would say is essential, right? And now I would say is form.
Yeah. Okay.
But that happened like year 4. I thought to myself, you know what? Do we have to really read the Statement of Faith at this time? Right. And do we really have to do these separate things? But then it worked. Yeah. So and
it seemed to connect with young adults in your case.
It seemed to connect with young adults.
Remember, my kids went, and it was like, to them it was traditional and boring. Yeah. But that church was filled with young adults.
You know what I found, and this is interesting. So it's a very kaku. It's a very strict. It would seem strict, right, to people. There's a silent moment, stiff. Yeah, it would seem stiff to many, although to many it would feel not stiff enough. What I found is that maybe this is just the generation that we end up hitting in urban city Jakarta, but we came across a generation who is exhausted by the hip church.
Welcome to my kids. So same idea. Yeah.
Yes. So a lot of
not that I was ever hip, but I'm saying we were contemporary. Sure.
You're still hip, Ed.
I am. Thank you. I don't think anybody who listens to such a live thinks that. Okay.
So we came, and I think pastors and missionaries would come and say, okay, how can I make this more relatable and connected to the young adults? Yeah. And they would think 90s. Right. Like they would think skinny jeans, ripped skinny jeans and all this stuff. But I think what I found by accident is that they don't want that. Yeah. They want to not be manipulated. Yeah. They want their time to not be wasted. And they actually really appreciated a time to be silent and rest in the Lord.
Interesting.
So these things that maybe missionaries or pastors in the 90s would have thought to be old and done with. Right. Young people don't want that. Right. They actually want that now.
Interesting.
That's what I found, at least in urban city Jakarta, in the circles
but that's for you, it's both a theological decision because you are shaped by liturgy and the gospel centrality of the Presbyterian service, and a missiological decision.
Yes.
So, because at Moody Church, downtown Chicago, Moody Church, I was the interim there for 4 years. It's a traditional church, and it's got a lot of young adults in it as well. But simultaneously, Pastor Michael, your church, and Mike Mariners is by no means a traditional church. Yeah. Your church, I'm guessing, is not a traditional church.
No, it's not.
So how are you, remember, theological vision for ministry and missiological application, how are you making choices? Now, you didn't start the church, but, it was at 200 when you took over, and it's, thousands now.
Yeah.
So how did you make decisions about how best to engage in worship in ways that are contextually appropriate?
Yeah. I look at it in 2 different ways, okay? The first one, in every society, I see it like this. There is a fundamental problem, which is evil and suffering and death. And then another one is the existential struggles, which is, being loved, accepted, worth, meaning. And I think a lot of churches in Surabaya touch a lot in the fundamental problem.
Okay.
Evil, suffering, sure. So the message that they tailor is usually, okay, you used to be poor. Now, because of the Lord bless you. Now you have financial breakthrough, those kind of things,
Sure.
So those are the jaded things that this generation in Surabaya hear all the time.
Yeah.
Never once they talk about how Jesus actually, become a parakletos, becoming with you and in your suffering. There's grace. Now that I tailor the message to be more in the existential struggle of the young people. And guess what? Now after 10 years pastoring the church, 81% of our congregation are millennial and younger.
Wow.
So that's about almost 2,000, something like that, you know. And yeah, and the worship still contemporary, but then we added in more liturgical.
Right.
So we added catechism, we added repentance prayer, we added some silence there. Even though we still have the band, we still have the lighting. So it's like in between.
Right.
We don't lose the expression, but at the same time we tone it down so we have time to reflect. At the same time to answer those existential struggles that they have.
Makes sense. So again, we're talking in part about how that theological vision for ministry and mission impacts our practice. And I think when we don't have a thoughtfulness to that, we end up just doing what works.
Yeah.
And then the problem is sometimes it stops working, or we forget why we did it in the first place. So what encouragement would you give to Christians to think theologically about everyday life?
Yeah. Instead of just, when you read books, when you are doing your reflection, you can't just copy and paste whatever that the book is saying. You have to find what is happening in your heart. What is the longing that is unanswered in your heart? And then you need to find the gospel gem and the beauty of the gospel and what Christ has done for you. And then when your heart is changed by the beauty of Christ, then you will know what you need to do, your methods, 1, 2, 3, what the steps, instead of trying to do the steps and hoping that something change in your heart. Sometimes we get it backward.
So good.
And I think we need to be more reflective in our way of thinking in order for us to have investigating the calibration. I like to use the word calibration of your heart instead of trying to do all these methods or practices, religious practices without understanding why,
So good. A calibration of the heart helps us with a theological vision for ministry, mission, and life.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to continue our conversation with Pastor Michael and Pastor Tazar in just a moment. And we're back at Stetzer Live, our final segment from Indonesia. Actually, I shouldn't say it's our final one because next week on the show, it's going to be Easter weekend in America. And so we are pre-recording for that, and we will have a conversation about theology of work. So we'll be doing that with 2 Indonesian guests because I have fallen in love with Indonesia. Maybe I'll move here. So Pastor Tazar at least had me preach at his church. I'm not saying you wouldn't, but I'm just saying. But let's
next time.
Okay, so it's Stetzer Live. Remind you, we are pre-recorded today, so we're not taking your calls. We're having a great conversation. All right, so let's talk about we talk about a vision for ministry that's common theological views. But in a sense, we're talking about partnership. And Christians have a long history of not doing partnership very well. Sometimes for some, it's my church and nobody else. We're the only true whatever. And then sometimes it's let's water down what we believe in order to all get along. And then the gospel's lost in the midst of all that. So let's start with you, Pastor Tazar. So you're collaborators. I mean, what term do you use to describe churches? Like you're Presbyterian, he's Pentecostal. Are you like cousins or what are you?
We can put whatever term there. Sister, cousin.
You say sister church or partners?
I think we're collaborators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
But there are theological differences between Presbyterians and Pentecostals. So what does that look like? How do you work together? You do it through city to city. How do you work together?
So I think in how we organize in our heads is that we don't want to minimize the differences, but we want the increase the gospel to be able to take in.
You don't want to minimize the differences, but you want to increase the gospel. I love that.
The gospel's big enough.
I think I'm going to make that a chapter in a book and pretend I came up with that. That's
There you
really
go.
good.
Because I think what happens is we're so scared talking about these differences because we're scared we're going to fight over it. And what happens is, at best, you get fake unity, where you don't really feel united. You just feel like it's kind of this fake, let's just pretend we don't believe in different things. But that doesn't really, it's not really helpful. So what we've tried to do is let's be honest about our differences, and you also minimize studying and understanding those concepts deeper. You can't talk about them because you're so scared talking about these differences. Don't be so scared. It's okay. But we come into it knowing that the gospel is bigger than these differences, and we can make the differences as big as they need to be, because the gospel is going to be bigger always than that. So that's the attitude we've come into it with, categorically in our heads, cognitively. But I think experientially, we started off already on mission. So Pastor Mike and I have a heart for the gospel. We want to see churches in Indonesia understand the gospel more. And I think at some point, that happened. Mission and gospel, the desire for gospel bigness happened first before the differences came about. And what happens is when we talk about those differences, I no longer view Pastor Mike as a two-dimensional person who's just, he's a credo Baptist.
Right.
It's like, okay, sure.
Just to define that for people, the baptized believers believe credo. God.
Sure. It's like, okay, he believes that, but he also has children, and he also has a life, and he also has a personality. And so when we enter into these conversations, he's already become a three-dimensional person to me that I care about.
Instead of labeling.
Yeah, instead of labeling, exactly. So these conversations just happen, and the gospel's already kind of, bigger. So those conversations just happen. Okay,
and you're both involved in the leadership of City to City Indonesia, which is a collaboration. And so it includes, obviously, right here is Pentecostals and Presbyterians, and you let in an occasional Baptist and some others.
Absolutely.
But how does that work? Because you do believe some things different than some things in addition. As a Pentecostal, you would believe some things in addition to what he believes. So how do you sort of navigate that without a haughty sense of pride, but to sort of see how God's working in each context?
As Cesar mentioned it, that because of mission drives unity. Mission based on what? Mission based on the gospel.
Right.
So the gospel is big enough for us to work together. So when we are actually working together in City to City, we don't talk about those because City to City doesn't have opinion.
Right. You don't talk about infant baptism or the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
We call it, I'm not sure if it's secondary matter. It could be, I'm not sure. Secondary matter.
We'll use the term secondary.
Yeah, secondary.
In the seminar I did earlier with you, I said there are essentials that you agree on. And then there's convictional things that you might have different convictions on, but the essentials you're in alignment with.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Then the essential.
Yeah.
And then, for example, if we have a congregation that moves to Jakarta, one of the first church that we recommend is Tazar's Church, CCC.
If you have a person like a family that moves.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe they have different view. I told them, okay, this is just secondary in my opinion because the essential were the same because we emphasize on the gospel of Jesus Christ, of what Christ has done, say salvation by grace through faith, triune God, the Bible, the authority of Scripture. Right. So that's how we navigate through things. So I don't know if. And then we work together in training other churches and pastors that has from different denomination and different secondary issue as well.
Yeah, my observation has been as an observer of Christians in minority Christian contexts. Like this is, of course, a minority. Just 10%, I think, identify as Christian in this country. Is that when it's a low number, they either tend to partner together or to turn on one another, and so there's a sense of division that's often there, et cetera, et cetera. But through City to City, you seem to be finding ways to partner together, but that's not always easy. So how do you navigate some of those challenges? You want to go with Pastor Taser on that one? Okay, let's start. But I want to hear from you too, Pastor.
It hasn't felt hard for me.
Hasn't been? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why, and I think by God's grace, the gospel really, hopefully, right? The gospel really has protected us from whatever ego, could have destroyed. Maybe. Go ahead, Mike.
I guess it's not hard for us that understand what it means to be united in the gospel.
Right.
But then it's a journey for us to be able to build that relationship. Then we have to strengthen the understanding of the gospel for all these leaders. So that's why we continue to emphasize Because as Christian, if the gospel is no longer center, then we're no longer Christian.
Yeah.
In essence, right? So it's a journey for me to continue to build relationship and explaining what the gospel is, to put the gospel at the center and highlight that over and over again in our conversation. That's the way.
So the centrality of the gospel shapes the ministry and the mission, finds ways for us to partner and collaborate together, and City to City has been the tool. Fascinating conversation here as well. For my American audience, we're on terrestrial radio, so there's no radio stations outside the United States. People can listen on podcasts. There's no radio station outside the podcast. Talk to my American audience and tell them, because right now the world's on fire. People are unsure of the future. And it's not dissimilar to some of the challenges you're having in Indonesia. Give us a word of exhortation, maybe a minute or so of exhortation to the American audience.
Whatever that happened in the U.S., I think it's also happening in Indonesia with all the tumult and the uncertainty, instability, everything that will be shaken will be shaken. That's why we continue to look to Jesus. We continue to look to what the cross has done. If you doubt if God is there and God cares, look at the cross. That's what He does for us. He is sovereign, but then He somehow never let go that sovereignty even when He died and suffered on that cross. And then He defeat death. And it shows that He cared to that point. And we are His. We are reconciled. We were dead in our trespasses, but now we are alive in Him. And we're a new creation, and we're adopted as His sons and daughters. So that gives me rest.
Good reminder.
Even though we're in a crazy world, we know that He is with us.
Pastor Tazar, 30 seconds. What word of exhortation? You lived in America. Well, you both did, but what exhortation would you have for Americans?
You want to be in the world, right? But you don't want to be enmeshed in it to where you think that your hope is placed on whatever rise and falls any earthly kingdom has. You just remember that you belong to a different kingdom. You have a different hope.
Amen.
No president, no king. Success or failures is ultimately going to affect your identity and your sense of rest. I think that's one. I think the other one is maybe define spiritual maturity by the fruit of the Spirit, not by certain political angles or whatever else you have.
That's good.
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control. All that. So just seek those things, pursue those things. Let the gospel sort of inflame those things in your heart, and have the political position you have, or whatever, but do so with the fruit of the Spirit.
Good word.
Yeah.
Good word. Etc. Live recorded in Indonesia. Thanks to my guests, Pastor Tazar, Pastor Mike. We're thankful for you. Pray for the work here in Indonesia, that the gospel work might continue to go forward. Thanks for listening to Etc. Live.